In the autumn of 1830, a quiet corner of northern England stands on the brink of transformation. What was once a modest market town of perhaps 30,000 souls in the late 18th century has, in just a few decades, become something unprecedented in human history. A sprawling industrial metropolis that contemporaries struggle to comprehend. From the surrounding hills and fields, the first thing you notice is the smoke. Thick, black plumes rising from hundreds of chimneys, merging into a low, permanent cloud that hangs over the city like a shroud. The air already carries the sharp tang of coal, the metallic bite of machinery, and that unmistakable sweet undertone of cotton fiber. This is Manchester in 1830. They call it Cottonopolis, the undisputed capital of the world's first industrial revolution. A furnace where steam, iron, human labor, and global trade are remaking everything we understand about progress. Come with me now, step inside this extraordinary, contradictory moment. You glide slowly along the Bridgewater Canal, the water oily and almost black beneath the flat-bottomed barge. The rhythmic creak of oars, the gentle slap of water against wood, and the distant shouts of dock workers create a steady pulse. Heavy vessels pass in the opposite direction, their decks piled high with bulging bales of raw cotton, harvested by enslaved labor on plantations thousands of miles away in the American South. That cotton has crossed the Atlantic, been unloaded in Liverpool's docks, and now travels these calm, man-made waterways straight into the beating heart of Britain's industrial engine. Every bale is a thread in an immense global web of exploitation, profit, and power. On either side, warehouses rise like stern red brick fortresses. Their loading bays stand open like mouths. Cranes groan as heavy crates swing overhead on thick ropes and pulleys. Men in coarse jackets and flat caps strain under sacks, their faces streaked with soot and sweat glistening in the dim light. The air thickens with every yard you travel. Sharp coal smoke stinging your eyes, the damp mustiness of brick and timber, hot machine oil from nearby engines, and beneath it all the faint, almost cloying sweetness of raw and freshly spun cotton carried on the breeze. This canal, engineered in the 1760s under the direction of the Duke of Bridgewater, was once hailed as an engineering wonder. Now, it is simply vital infrastructure, taken for granted, carrying not just cotton, but coal from Lancashire pits, machinery parts, chemical dyes, barrels of finished cloth bound for export, and above all the endless human tide of people seeking work. In 1801, the population stood at roughly 70,000. By the 1831 census, it will surpass 142,000, a near doubling in 30 years, driven not by births alone, but by constant waves of immigration. Dozens, well over 100 tall, narrow brick buildings stand shoulder to shoulder across the horizon. These are not ordinary structures. They are cotton spinning mills, 5, 6, sometimes 7 stories high. Vertical factories designed to pack as much machinery as possible into crowded urban space. Unlike the older water-powered mills of Derbyshire or Lancashire valleys, these are powered by the new miracle of steam engines, allowing industry to concentrate where labor and transport already converge. By 1830, Manchester and its immediate districts contain at least 99 cotton spinning mills, perhaps as many as 110 when smaller concerns are counted. Inside them labor roughly 28,000 people, men operating the heavy spinning frames, women carding and piecing, and tragically large numbers of children, some as young as 6 or 7, performing the most delicate and dangerous tasks. Shifts run 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, with only the rarest breaks for saints' days or when machinery fails. Look upward at the chimneys. Hundreds, perhaps 1,000, slender stacks pierce the sky like the blackened spines of some vast creature. Day and night, they exhale dense, choking, sulfur-laden smoke, turning noon into perpetual twilight and coating every surface in fine soot. For miles outside the city, travelers see the reddish glow reflected on low clouds, a man-made aurora that rarely lifts even in strong winds. The sun arrives filtered, dim, almost sepia. 5 years from now, in 1835, the French aristocrat Alexis de Tocqueville will walk these streets and capture the paradox in haunting prose. From this foul drain, the greatest stream of human industry flows out to fertilize the whole world. From this filthy sewer, pure gold flows. Here, humanity attains its most complete development and its most brutish. Here, civilization works its miracles, and civilized man is turned almost into a savage. You step off the towpath onto the uneven cobbles of Market Street, the commercial heart pounding with life. The noise crashes over you. Wooden clogs scraping stone, iron-rimmed cart wheels grinding, hawkers crying hot pies, tuppence, fresh oysters, gingerbread a penny, ribbons, cheap prints. From every direction rolls the low, unending thunder of machinery, a bass note that vibrates through your boots and into your chest. Men hurry past in flat caps and grease-stained waistcoats, faces dark with mill dust. Women in heavy shawls clutch baskets or lead small children by the hand. Here and there a gentleman in a tall beaver hat and tailored coat strides purposefully. The new industrial elite who have risen from nothing to fortunes in a single lifetime. The street teems with commerce, shops selling tools, textiles, patent medicines, public houses spilling laughter, argument, and the smell of ale. News vendors shouting the latest cotton futures from Liverpool and New Orleans. But slip down any side alley or covered passage and the illusion fractures. Hidden courts open, cramped, sunless yards lined with back-to-back houses stacked so tightly that daylight barely reaches the ground. No proper drains. Open sewers run between buildings. Water comes from shared pumps, often fouled. Families of 8, 10, 12 people cram into single damp rooms with broken windows patched by rags or newspaper. These are the districts: Ancoats, Little Ireland, Angel Meadow, where most mill workers live, deliberately concealed behind respectable frontages so the wealthy need never confront the human cost. Disease stalks these places relentlessly. Typhus claims lives every winter. Cholera will arrive in the coming decade with terrifying speed. For the working poor, life expectancy hovers around 30 years, if childhood is survived at all. A weaver's wage might buy bread and potatoes, but little else. Rent devours much of what remains. Yet life persists defiantly. A street seller pushes a barrow of hot potatoes or roasted chestnuts. A ballad singer with a battered fiddle performs for coppers thrown into a cap. Children chase makeshift balls through the muck or play at factory with bits of wood. Young couples steal quiet moments in shadowed doorways. Laughter, song, argument, all the stubborn signs of ordinary humanity, refuse to be snuffed out. Inside the mill, now push through the heavy oak doors of one of the largest mills. A wall of heat and sound envelopes you instantly, like entering an oven filled with thunder. The air is thick, choking, laden with floating cotton lint that drifts like slow snow. You taste the fluff on your lips, feel it coat your throat and lungs. Long rows of spinning mules stretch away into shadow, massive iron machines, each holding hundreds of spindles that whirl and clatter in terrifying synchrony. Overhead, broad leather belts whip around wooden pulleys, transmitting relentless power from a gigantic beam engine in the basement. The floor trembles constantly. Dust swirls. Shafts and gears turn without pause. Children as young as 6 dart between the frames like agile ghosts. Their small, nimble fingers tie broken threads in seconds, clear accumulated lint, oil bearings, tasks too fiddly or too dangerous for adults to do quickly. Adult spinners, mostly men, stand watchful, eyes narrowed, pay tide to output. Every snapped thread or minute of downtime costs dearly. Overseers patrol with canes or straps, not always used, but always present as threat. Yet the productivity is breathtaking. A single self-acting mule here, attended by just a few workers, can spin more thread in one day than hundreds of hand spinners could achieve in a week. This efficiency has made Manchester richer per capita than almost anywhere on Earth. even as its poorest inhabitants live in conditions worse than rural paupers. The thread produced here clothes millions across continents. The wealth it generates funds railways, mansions, empire itself. But on September 15th, 1830, an even greater revolution arrives. You stand among thousands at Liverpool Road, the Manchester terminus of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, the world's first true intercity passenger line built for steam. Flags snap overhead, 8 special trains wait, locomotives gleaming. At their head is the rocket, George Stephenson's sleek, powerful design, already legendary. The Duke of Wellington arrives to cheers. MP William Huskisson, a passionate advocate, is present. At the signal, engines hiss, wheels bite rails, and the trains pull away amid roaring applause. For the first time, people travel between cities purely by machine. 35 miles to Liverpool, once a full day, now just hours. Time and space shrink. Tragedy strikes that day. At Parkside, Huskisson steps down, misjudges the gap, and is crushed by an oncoming locomotive. He dies that night, the first railway passenger fatality in history. A brutal reminder, progress demands blood. From a high vantage, you gaze once more over smoky Manchester, raw, unfinished, full of contradictions. A forge hammering out modernity amid soot and suffering. Factories, railways, urban millions, all begin spreading from here. As one observer would later say, what Manchester does today, the world does tomorrow. Thank you for walking these streets with me. Which city, which year should we step in next? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe for more journeys into the past. I'll see you in history.